We're back again. This is a podcast about buildings and cities. I'm Luke Jones.
I'm George Kinjal.
We meant to record this conversation all in one go, but it all got a bit too much, and so we're picking up the sort of threads at the point that we left them off.
I think we might have been able to finish it last time, but it might have been our last podcast.
It might have been. I actually couldn't speak. I actually completely lost my voice for about 3 days after the partial recording that we did. So I'm not sure that we would actually have got to the end. And it, would have been...
Yes, I remember you optimistically saying there's going to be one-parter or two-parter. Well, we shall see.
I mean, we shall see, yeah.
Because we reached a point of summation nearly halfway through the book, we should perhaps reiterate that we've been through the book.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of kind of foreplay. There's some early history of New York, a long digression about Coney Island and about the technological fantasies of Coney Island.
Yeah.
And then we have a long period of the development of the skyscraper according to Rem.
Yeah. And this is a sort of New York-only story, and it's also a particular kind of development, which is a formal development. It's the development of the skyscraper as an architectural idea, rather than a technological idea or an economic idea, a phenomenon in kind of real estate investing.
This is an idea of a skyscraper essentially unique to Rem Koolhaas.
Yeah. The early skyscraper kind of, it emerges out of this like technological fantasy of Coney Island. It emerges out of the constraint of the grid plan of Manhattan. It kind of comes to be in its early form as this ideal sort of fusion of the kind of incipient types that he calls the island, the lighthouse, and the kind of extruded block. I can't remember what his term of art for that is.
Normally, we often have a thing where we criticise or sort of say that people don't read the book. People have just a received idea about something, and then we go to like excruciatingly go over what it says. Should we do the opposite and define what his skyscraper is in a way that he never says it? For me, it's got to be a complicated thing. The most basic image of a skyscraper, if you were thinking about it, is quite a simple thing. It's a big tall tower going up.
Yeah.
And it might have a pointy top or not, or it might have a straight top. That is not a Koolhaas skyscraper. His one is both spatially and in terms of its use and occupation, complex. So ideally, it should be one of these kind of stepping back with a tower or multiple towers, which is kind of partly driven by the needs of iconography and the zoning restrictions. And then there should be lots of things which are different going on in very close proximity within the box. And it should be that different things are going on in different parts, and that you can't see that from the outside. So we've talked lots of times about buildings where you have an outer skin, and that hints in a very ambiguous way as to different things going on within. For example, you can have different patterns of windows or something like that.
Yeah.
That must not be occurring.
Yeah.
What should be occurring is you have an ambiguous, complicated mass with a sort of facade that could mean almost anything, but really should just be continuous and talking about bigness.
Yeah.
And within that, ideally, should be going on remarkable diverse activities in remarkable diverse spaces. And the more diverse and strange they are, the more inconsistent they are, the better.
So the interior of the skyscraper for Koolhaas is a kind of portal into fantasy and into another realm of ideas, or like another city, fundamentally. For him, each skyscraper is the potential of a completely different way of life, a different way, like a different world. It exists like within this facade, which is so, I mean, the term that his like little slogan for it is the lobotomy. There's like no connection, the natural connection between the kind of expressive exterior of the building and the kind of experiential interior of it has been kind of conclusively and brutally severed. And they kind of then almost become like separate personalities of this object.
But there also has to be, I can't remember what it is, the
vertical schism, I think.
Schism.
Yeah.
Whereby him associates that totally different activities can be going on separated only by a floor,
Yeah.
ideally with completely different sorts of plans. There's very few examples of this actually existing. Even if you like bend the truth as far as you can imagine, there's very little examples of this actually occurring. But the ideal thing, which should be that, it's like Roman baths on one floor, a jungle on the next floor. The next floor is office cubicles.
Yeah.
Like the John Malkovich not tall enough floor.
Yeah. That's it. The key to Koolhaas's idea of the skyscraper is that it is a seemingly pragmatic object, which in fact is concealing the most outrageously ideological and conceptual kind of program. And this is his sort of paranoid reading of the history of the skyscraper and what it's all about, is that far from being something which seems, apart from its like largeness, to otherwise be rather banal, it's actually something which is connected to the most sort of radical possible reimagining of the city at every level.
Yeah.
And that's the case which he's trying to sort of prove in his reading of the history.
The tone isn't consistent. At times it can be kind of normal and lively and chirpy but sort of straightforward, and other times it's like ludicrous purple and kind of mad, the writing. It's like a self-satire. And when they said it's more lucid or banal, he could be sort of describing there is an ideal of each tower being a village in which there is like employment and people living there and working there and shopping there and having fun there. And that allows for a super dense city because people don't need to migrate across town all the time.
Yeah.
And you can have a super compact city, which is also possible without, and this is the subtext, without driving massive, like severing roads through it, or massive severing arteries.
Maybe I'll just read this little quotation because this is an example both of what you're talking about in terms of the prose and also, this idea of like a total vision for the city. Congestion itself is the essential condition for realizing each of these metaphors in the reality of the grid. Only congestion can generate the superhouse, the mega village, the mountain, and finally the modernized automotive Venice. The culture of congestion proposes the conquest of each block by a single structure. Each building will become a house, a private realm inflated to admit house guests, but not to the point of pretending universality in the spectrum of its offerings. Each house will represent a different lifestyle and different ideology. On each floor, the culture of congestion will arrange new and exhilarating human activities in unprecedented combinations. Through fantastic technology, it will be possible to reproduce all situations, from the most natural to the most artificial, wherever and whenever desired. Each city within a city will be so unique that it will naturally attract its own inhabitants. Each skyscraper, reflected in the roofs of an endless flow of black limousines, is an island of the very modernized Venice, a system of 2028 solitudes. The culture of congestion is the culture of the 20th century.
Well, I had a theory about this sort of thing.
I mean, one thing that, like, when you're reading it out loud that occurs is one of the many things it's doing is parodying kind of early 20th century utopian kind of texts. Like, there's a certain, like, determination to, like, give all of the details, very, like, to really explain and define absolutely everything in this is how the city's going to be. These are all of the components. I've kind of worked out the program. Let me tell you about it.
Yeah, maybe. And then this is something that was, I think, popular. If you think about the culture of London in the 60s, early 70s, think about the Architectural Association and like Archigram and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It's a bit like the popular culture of the time. You're taking serious things and combining them with non sequiturs and making them very silly.
Yeah.
Or like applying something serious to something really stupid.
Yeah. Koolhaas has a funny way of expressing his sort of, or like using his erudition. And I think part of that is like a slight sort of ventriloquism, or like a slight sort of kind of inhabiting a certain voice and then taking it into a surreal place, but still kind of inhabiting it.
Well, some of the voices are quite banal. We have a picture on the screen of the Waldorf Astoria.
Oh, yeah.
And there's bits where he's describing anecdotes from that, which really feel like he's a different writer. Where it feels like he's someone writing a much more
much more
chatty,
like sort of social history.
social history, much more conventional, kind of slightly salacious, but much more pulling his punches. And I think really it's that when you're reading a work, you get, I'm sure I've complained on this podcast about like, oh, I'm so sick of this guy's voice in my head.
Yeah.
Like, I can't stand any more Ruskin. And you get the voice in your head, and he'll read it and then parrot out that voice. But I do think it is also to do with the culture of the time of reappropriating or misappropriating something serious. Where do you think his heart is? Or do you think he has one?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. He just wants architecture to be fun and to make the world like more fun, interesting, exciting. He's bored of like boring old guys talking about ethics. The kind of middle bit of the book has this exploration of 3 big skyscrapers from the golden age of the interwar skyscraper. So there's the Waldorf Astoria, which is kind of complicated. It has a kind of complicated history that I wasn't all that interested in, about sort of unifying different plots and things like that, and which eventually is kind of transplanted to another site and made into a massive skyscraper. There's the Empire State Building, which is tied to the others because it's actually built on the site of the first Waldorf Astoria. And then there's the Downtown Athletics Club, which I think, like, as much as any building in the book, is the encapsulation of the Koolhaas kind of ideal of what a skyscraper allows you to do, what Manhattanism really is.
And there may be like American or like people from New York who'd say, of course, this is a super famous building. But outside the context of this book, this is not something I've heard of in anything else.
No,
it doesn't seem like this is pretty obscure, but has great rhetorical power for him.
Yeah. So, I mean, the Waldorf Astoria building, I think there's a couple of things in it which kind of, there's the potential in it of a new sort of lifestyle, because this is the period when quite a lot of people were living in hotels, and they were living in kind of serviced apartments. I think not just in New York, actually. I think that there was a bit of it in London as well. The idea that you would have your kind of...
in London, it's kind of an extension of living in clubs.
Yeah, so it's a sort of luxury. You'd have your apartment, and then there was a kind of a shared like kitchen or something that would be preparing your
you
meals.
had things called sets.
Yeah, so you would only have to have one manservant rather than also a cook or something.
Yeah, or
like
none.
That. Yeah,
like they're all contracted out. Sort of services.
It was obviously like a very sort of cool milieu where lots of people wanted to. He has a quote from Mr. Forbes, the tycoon, saying, "I just had to fake it and go and live there so that I could surround myself with all of these other very successful people and become very successful." I don't know. There's a quotation from someone who's living there who essentially says, if you just ask the building management, you can kind of make anything happen.
There are various parties, and like the big one is, okay, on the roof, we're gonna have a farm with all these animals. Yeah. One of the cows is gonna milk champagne. Yeah. It's gonna be on the roof, and that's gonna be the party. Yeah. And they're like, fine.
They're like, yeah, we'll make that happen. Yeah.
Fine. Here's a big bill.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, I find if you're like willing to profit huge amounts of money, all sorts of people will do all sorts of things. I wanted to go, before we completely gloss over all of it, I know you weren't super interested about the history of it, but it seemed to me that he was really trying to build up a point about, he's got something which is a slippery concept, which is like about this kind of like he talks about reality insufficiency, borrowed reality. Yeah. And in a way, it's that this hotel starts off as like the big house of the Astors. Yeah. Which is the Astoria bit. And then it becomes a hotel modelled on a big house. And then that one is knocked down, and it then becomes a big hotel. Yeah. And then that one is knocked down, and the naming rights are sold, and this thing is built somewhere else. Yeah. But incorporating physical bits of reclaimed previous building, and also this kind of history of like, I think the Astor family were like sort of the first like real big new money New Yorkers, right? Somehow managed to like develop monotonous buying power of furs. I don't really understand how that works as a business model, but anyway. And there's the play of like, what is real or like faked reality with this like moving,
Yeah.
and which bits of the building you incorporate and which bits of the story you incorporate, when really you're just buying the rights.
Yeah.
First it's this aristocratic house, then it's the management for the aristocrat, then it's another manager for a company, and then it's a company buying the rights to that.
Yeah.
And in each case, they kind of have buildings which are kind of like meant to be like rising as ghosts out of the old thing. Or there's, I find it a bit of a slippery idea, but it was rather like his slippery idea of, the sphere and the spike as a metaphor for kind of New York development. I think there is a thing which is about, it's not just enough to have the building to be skyscrapery. It also needs, once you've done this thing where you make it super synthetic and you're kind of, according to his logic, lobotomizing and schisming, you develop you're in a kind of hysterical realm, and you can then anchor it by like transporting in fake or real bits of history.
Yeah.
Like it's some sort of, it's a bit like Ubik or something,
Yeah.
You've got like a real thing, and then suddenly everything else is like falling to dust, and the real thing is there.
Yeah.
And the real thing is like bits of architectural reclamation you've pulled out of the old ballroom or whatever.
So what did you make of I didn't really know what to make of the Empire State Building it's more of a kind of postscript to the...
Well, the problem with the Empire State Building is it's not, by his definition, really a skyscraper, is it?
Yeah.
It is
boring.
obviously a skyscraper. It's like the skyscraper.
Yeah.
But it's not a Koolhaas one. I don't think it's super duper mixed use.
It's just a lot of offices.
I don't really know. It's not formally very complex.
Yeah.
I mean, it does have a wider bit at the bottom. It does have a point on the top. He likes the fact that airships can moor at it.
Yeah. It's a kind of clear...
Which is lively.
Yeah.
Does it have a beacon on top at some point?
Yeah.
He likes beacons on the top of things.
Yeah, and it's like a self-conscious piece of icon making as well, isn't it?
In the different stages of this like transmutation of the Waldorf Astoria, there's a point when the historic Waldorf Astoria, which has got the ghost of all these great parties, the center of social life, is being demolished, and that is in turn transformed into the Empire State Building, which is a project like many great towers, like conceived before the crash. And executed after it. It's
like he slightly struggles to know what to say about it. What he comes up with is, because obviously it's just not all that interesting apart from being very large. And
I don't know, but it's definitely not all that interesting in that it does not conform to his story.
Yeah, it's not very complicated. So the big one is the Downtown Athletics Club. This is by far the favourite. This is the like paradigmatic Manhattanist building. This is the kind of expression of the...
This is sort of what he wants the whole world to be.
Yeah, this is the dream of it.
It's a private members club.
Yeah.
In a
really...
modest skyscraper. It's fairly big. It's interesting that you could...
It's got 38 floors. Only 35 of them inhabitable, though.
Yeah, which is a lot.
It's got a rather amazing section, because certainly the lower part of the tower is all full of all of these different like attractions and activity spaces for the members. What it all comes down to is this sort of like the dream of stacking all of these extremely incompatible and strange things on top of each other to create a hitherto undreamt of idea of entertainment, of enjoyment, of like experience.
Yeah, it feels like crazy golf architecture, doesn't it? It's like,
well, yeah, it does literally have crazy golf in it somewhere, doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, it's got an indoor. One of the floors is an indoor golfing, which looks pretty rubbish actually. I mean, I don't think that floor has like windows or anything.
Lockers, squash, balcony, golf, gymnasium, lockers, medical baths, lockers, swimming pool, grill, kitchen, dining, utility, roof garden, which actually is not nearly at the top, lounge, private dining. Oh, there's also handball down at the bottom, and billiards. And then the top part of it is all sort of accommodation. One of the like famous images of the book, then one of the ones that people remember, is this like imaginary image of these naked guys in the locker room eating oysters with their boxing gloves on, which is this,
I mean, it's definitely referencing Tom of Finland.
Yeah, it's like a Tom of Finland pastiche by...
and this is evoked from, first, it's like Rem Koolhaas has imagined what he would love. He's read a journalist description that you could have like room service to the gym, and someone had like gone naked boxing and then had oysters, and then he's read this and got very excited, and then he's explained that. I can't pronounce his
Madeline Riesendorp. Yeah.
Madeline Riesendorp.
Yeah.
He's explained that to her, and she is actually a great reinterpreter of images, and then has produced this,
Yes.
which is sort of two steps of paranoid analysis away from anything that I think ever happened.
Yeah.
But is in a way the ideal world.
Yeah.
He describes these people as like sterile drones.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I thought he sort of made it sound like a gay paradise. Like they're all. He said describes them as escaping, as like being on the run from, like eligible, like women that they might be made to married to.
There's a series of Madeline images,
Yeah,
and actually, I think they are important for the book, and they are ludicrously reduced.
yeah,
It's like some sort of comical slight in this edition. I don't understand the politics of it at all, but things that logically should be quite central to the sort of visual presentation of the argument become barely bigger than postage stamp sized.
I don't know. There's something funny going on.
Like, why
Mm.
is that like this really central thing?
Yeah.
That's the book's cover.
In the first edition, I think they were all
They
were all really big.
It's
and-
the wraparound of the book and their whole pages.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or spreads.
Yeah.
And in fact, the images in general are pages
Yeah.
with text on the other side.
No, it's odd.
Someone should do a facsimile
Of the original.
of the original one.
Yeah, I wonder what's preventing them.
The series of images are important to because they also say the way in which you can read it.
Yeah.
And we haven't really discussed them. But they would be the first thing that you saw when you saw the book. You saw the cover.
Yeah, and you saw the...
And the cover is... The painting is a sort of popular style.
The style is sort of surrealist. Like, it's like a little bit in the style of sort of Dali, but not like 100% of the way there. They're gouaches.
It's also kind of slightly popular / naive. Like, this is definitely deliberately naive to an extent. And the image is the Chrysler Building and the Empire State Building are in bed together.
Yeah.
They are being discovered in flagranti by...
That's the RCA Tower, I think.
by the RCA Tower with kind of New York looking on.
Yeah.
The grid is their carpet. The lamp of the Statue of Liberty is their bedside lamp.
There is a little Goodyear blimp is the...
prophylactic.
Yeah.
Discarded.
Yeah.
And there's an image on the wall which is used in Rem Koolhaas' lecture, which is a strange popular painting which was like one painting was done and then someone thought that's interesting, took a photograph of it, painted over it, made that into another postcard, which was then by another person painted over and made into another postcard.
Okay, yeah.
That was something that they discovered, which is on the wall for some reason.
Yeah, I think part of what's great about these images is that they do express the idea of the kind of key ideas of the book. They kind of condense them and express them very powerfully, but they also are in a kind of ironic relationship to them, which makes them better. Like they hold the ideas quite lightly, and they sort of
helps tell you how to read the book.
Yeah.
Whereas the current cover is serious and poorly chosen.
Yeah.
For reasons we can discuss at the end, why it's poorly chosen.
Yeah, I don't.
But it doesn't say this is a work which you kind of are meant to read.
In a sense,
on the front,
yeah.
it's like you read this straight.
Yeah.
And with these, you don't read it straight. Like they are obviously satirical.
Yeah, you read it in a certain spirit. You read it in a certain voice, and they convey that as well as being very, very compelling and very like enjoyable, funny, sort of silly.
Yeah, and they kind of got a good reading of... Rem is very erudite and often of kind of high culture sources. That I think is where he more naturally originally sits. It's very... Whereas these are quite erudite of a certain sort of popular image making.
Yeah, they're channeling like a lot of those kinds of influences, aren't they?
Yeah, they're quite book cover as well, or record sleeve as well.
Yeah.
As all the various other things they're doing.
There we go. Yeah.
I think partly this image tells you
it tells you the idea.
It tells you the idea, but
And
it
it
also
also
tells you,
it tells you
how seriously and not seriously it is,
Yeah.
and also kind of what he's aiming for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because this building obviously wasn't exclusively. I mean, it may be, but it seems fanciful to me that there would be a 30-story gay gym.
yeah.
That would be exclusively what it was. It seems.
Yeah, that's very much the kind of because they had the apartments upstairs. You could just go. You could just like spend all your time like working out,
Yeah.
eating whatever you liked in the restaurant, and socializing with other men without
Yeah, but then I know that
being buttonholed by some aunt or other.
yeah. I mean, the thing is, when you say aunt or something, you slightly introduce what I think is the problem, which is that this. I'm much less familiar with American culture, but this feels pretty Bertie Wooster
It does
to
feel
me.
very Bertie Wooster. It
Much
feels like-
more Bertie Wooster than Tom of Finland.
It's like techno rooster.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they might all be like sitting around naked in the steam room. That was definitely
Yeah.
a thing. And I think actually it's probably a very interesting social history story in this building, which is slightly it's not being totally ignored, but it's definitely being transmuted quite a long way here, isn't it?
Yeah. So to the extent that you can read across from Rem's Manhattanism to his actual like architectural later work, I'd say this section is one of the places you can do it. He's really fascinated by this kind of section with these various activities kind of going on above
And they have
below one
slightly
another.
different floor plates.
Yeah.
Like I can see a ramp.
Yeah.
That are different heights, things thicken and thin, which is a lot more interesting than a lot of skyscrapers have pretty boring sections.
Yeah.
And this is something, in a way, a skyscraper is a building which is the opposite of a Beaux-Arts building has an interesting plan, right?
Yeah.
And it has a somewhat interesting section, but it doesn't have lots of things piled on top of each other, so it can only be that interesting.
Yeah.
Whereas an actual skyscraper or an actual big tower is very often the same unit repeated a lot of times with a kind of introduction and a conclusion. Whereas this building is a building which has got a complicated section to a degree, at least more complicated than the typical tower, which makes it much more interesting.
Yeah.
Rem Koolhaas, a number of Rem Koolhaas prominent buildings have very different things on different floors, and it's an idea he is fascinated with.
Yeah. And I mean, really actually taking an idea from this and actually pushing it to like a much more exaggerated degree. So if you think of the ZKM design for Karlsruhe, like that's this turned up to 100. Okay, so that's the exploration of these three buildings. This is like the young manhood of the skyscraper. Yeah. And what he then wants to go on to is so we had it kind of first being formulated, we have it in its kind of full sort of strength and vigor, and then what you have in the 30s is, I don't know, almost like a self-conscious Manhattanism. Like up until this point, Manhattanism as an idea is something which is kind of arisen organically and kind of been put together by people at the time as they're doing it.
I mean, is Manhattanism a Rem Koolhaas coining?
Absolutely, yeah.
So we can make that clear. Like the thing he's talking about,
it's made up.
It is a retrospective.
Yeah, it's a retrospective coinage. Yeah.
Manifesto for a movement that isn't a movement. It's a place. It's possibly a culture. Possibly. Yeah. It's his idea of it.
Yeah, so the transition basically is into a kind of self-conscious Manhattanism, and the center of that is this project for Rockefeller Center, which was a big 3-block development kind of in sort of mid-town, I think.
Still there.
So yeah, very much still there, which for him, it's a self-conscious work of Manhattanism. It's by people. The skyscraper is not just sort of happening now. Architects themselves have kind of conceptualized what it is, and it's got a kind of knowingness and a sort of self-consciousness about
something
the way
this
in
has
which
been
they're
building
doing
up. There have been people who he would say have had proposals for what they're like, engaging in a rhetorical exercise to try and make things like that, like Ferris.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Some other people have been sort of just coming to coming to practical solutions.
Yeah.
And then he has, this is a kind of, Avengers Assemble, right? We're assembling a cast of all-stars. We've got this super important project. Also, crash has happened.
Yeah.
No one's got any work.
Yeah. And then the other thing to say is that I think both at the time and probably in retrospect, like regarded as fairly sort of mediocre piece of architecture. And
Yeah, I don't like. In some ways, some people like. There was a weird, grotesque thing in the strange thing in the history of London pragmatism in the 80s, which is the Broadgate Centre. This really boring thing around the corner.
yeah.
And I forget the man who organised that, and he was trying to get that listed. He's been doing a campaign for years to try and get that listed. This is like genius work, and his thing was, this is the Rockefeller Center for London.
Oh yeah. Well, the developer is Stuart Lipton, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And it seemed like that must mean that the Rockefeller Center is actually a big thing,
Yeah.
but it isn't.
I think
It isn't a big thing as an example for architects.
No, not really. I mean, so I think part of Koolhaas's kind of iconoclasm, I guess, like his sort of angry young man sort of program in the book, is partly about like reclaiming figures and projects that have been regarded as boring or sort of meretricious, and saying that they're actually architecturally very interesting. So it's not really in the book, but he's also like really interested in this guy Wallace Harrison, who designed Lincoln Center and was the person who actually executed the UN design. And
I feel like it must be that this has sort of worked, because I feel like they're kind of well regarded, but not like well regarded as being extraordinary, but as like good, solid.
Yeah, no, I would say they're kind of
projects.
They're kind of like Basil Spence in this country. Like,
Yeah.
So, I mean, now people are actually slightly kind of attached to some of the projects, but like at the time, not regarded as a terribly good or interesting person. He wants to say that these things are actually sort of deeply interesting.
So for him, in a way, the Rockefeller Building is the key to New York.
Yeah.
It's the most important thing.
Yeah.
In this book, at any rate.
Anyway, I mean, so you got to assemble the cast first, and the first person in that process is this guy Ray Hood. Yeah, one of his heroes. And someone was telling me like part of the reason why Ray Hood is in this book so much is that there was an exhibition about him on literally at the time that Koolhaas was writing it, and like that's a big part of the.
Yeah, he's definitely really like projecting a heroic story, or like he's taking possibly from this exhibition or publications of the time a heroic life of this figure. Yeah.
Well, again, it's all very ironic, because the thing about him as a figure is that in public he's sort of Philistine. He only ever wants to talk about money. He doesn't do the kind of architectural thing of like talking about sort of creative things, and never talks about beauty or anything like that. But actually his work is very compelling and very and is really cool. But so I think Koolhaas is. Koolhaas is.
This feels like reading this bit. It felt like this is not a reliable narrator.
No, of course it isn't. So I mean, he does like a quick introduction to some of his earlier buildings. So he done like a bunch of skyscrapers. He did the American Radiator building, which is this sort of jazzy,
great name,
black number with gold details. It's got a very good elevator in it. He did the Daily News building.
That photograph makes the building look extremely boring.
Yeah. It's got a good thing in the lobby, which is this like enormous model of the globe inside a kind of something which looks a little bit like an old kind of operating theatre or something like that.
It looks like it's emerging from the fires of something sort of science fictional below. Yeah.
And the McGraw Hill building, which is this, again, rather attractive.
Sort of brassy details.
Yeah, and it's got these sort of nice, like slightly variegated, kind of like pale blue, sort of duck egg kind of colours playing across the facade, which Koolhaas talks about as the fire of Manhattanism inside the iceberg of modernism. It's the kind of slogan for this building. But yeah, like Hood is he was obviously a major architect of the time, and he's one of the protagonists of the Rockefeller project. But yeah, he's kind of fascinated by like, I think it's his sort of affect and his kind of shtick as this guy who really always wants to talk to the clients about money and always wants to tell them about how much money they're going to make.
Yeah, and at the same time
yeah.
trying to like make things look attractive. If you're trying to get these big projects off the road, you've got to know your audience.
Yeah.
The banal project for London Met by Leibskin,
Yeah.
he went and did a presentation, a notion it was going to be about like how this was aligned to the stars.
Yeah.
I think, but I think when he the actual recording, he immediately looks at the audience and says how many jobs this is going to bring to the area.
Yeah.
And I think it's just part of being a professional.
Yeah. No, what particular type of...
You know, it takes a lot of people to get one of these big projects off the road, off the ground.
Yeah. There is this very cool unbuilt project, which is this church, but with a massive parking garage underneath it, which is illustrated in this.
I couldn't work out, is it full of flats above? Or...
The parking?
No, the top of that is not just the church. That's occupied towers.
Oh
it?
yeah, I think the towers are also occupied. So there's a sort of church bit lower down, and then although they're kind of expressed a bit like a sort of church steeple. The plan's also fun because everything's on the diagonal. The church is like actually running across the diagonal of this square plan. He also is like a futurist.
Yeah, this is definitely belying the fact that he's just talking about money. Because he obviously isn't.
Yeah.
Because he's putting out propaganda pieces like this about how Manhattan should be.
Yeah.
And it is an extreme vision. He's got an idea which is that you can have a massive tower, but actually cut it up with roads. So that you have the mass of a huge building, but it's divided up by the grid.
Yeah.
So there's big cuts going through it. Which is a real part of, actually, I think, Rem Koolhaas's massing program for a skyscraper, is that it shouldn't be a singular, or it ideally should be this like compound object.
Yeah.
Because that's more congested.
Yeah.
Visually, more. And the notion is that you build these sort of Acropolis superstructures and then just like Boolean subtract the roads all the way down to the ground. There's no this isn't a program of driving roads through buildings.
Yeah.
This is as in the, in a tunnel. This is a program where you create a mountain and then you slice these vertical sections out of them, which presumably allows light and air to get closer to the core, but also allows for this very striking image. Now, how it would have been at street level, you could sort of imagine.
It's also full of these inhabited bridges as well.
Yeah,
isn't
that's
it?
the second sort of part of it. And those towers are kind of located at periodically on the grid.
Yeah.
And then after you've super densified the city, and I think the idea is you can't have the whole thing at that density, otherwise it will be kind of uninhabitable. You then just radiate out inhabited bridges. And this project feels...
So it's got about 10 of them going over to New Jersey. And but maybe the same
and
number
then
going to Brooklyn and Queens.
And this project feels kind of 70s.
Yeah. I don't think we included it, but I guess these are very much under the influence of that Hugh Ferris image of a sort of skyscraper inhabited bridge, which is one of his classic sort of City of Tomorrow, Metropolis images.
It's utopian without any proposal for utopia, right? It's just a building, but it's this proposal of something so far beyond. Like, it's utopian in that there's so much what would produce this. Yeah. But it's apolitical, which is quite exciting to them.
Well, yeah. It's also, I mean, these buildings are kind of like mega structural in scale. Like, he has the idea that they start to become the whole size of a city block and to include all sorts of...
Well, I mean, the mountains are 4 city blocks, at least. 4 or 8.
Yeah. Yeah, people almost kind of escape. I don't know, it's just like another level on top of the... If the skyscraper was the city in the city, then I don't know what this is, but it's...
There have been lots of images of this subsequently.
Yeah.
It's megastructural.
It is megastructural, yeah. I mean, a lot of this is kind of megastructural. The whole sort of Venice dream seems to me to have a kind of continuity with later
Yeah, the Venice
megastructural
dream
ideas.
is the idea that you replace the water with cars.
Yeah,
Or the idea is Venice
yeah,
is a city where there are roads you can't walk on
yeah,
because they're made of water.
yeah,
What if we scaled everything up 5 times and those roads you can't walk on are motorways?
yeah,
And we exist in a Venice of motorways.
yeah,
It has a bit of his reality deficiency thing, right? Where, okay, we're going to, on this extremely un-Venice-y concept,
yeah,
we are going to transpose the reality of Venice.
yeah,
Or by reality deficiency, he in a way means image deficiency.
yeah,
We're going to put this metaphorical image on top.
yeah.
An image with specificities.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, one of the things where he's sort of trying quite hard to tell a particular story which isn't necessarily supported by the evidence is in trying to make Ray Hood like a really Manhattanite architect, when it's quite clear that in lots of ways he's actually reaching out and towards a bunch of other things which are quite contrary to the philosophy that he's trying to solidify, you know. So like not these kind of mega structural ideas, or these ideas which look like a kind of sort of Beaux-Arts tinged rendering of like Robert Moses or something like that, but also, you know, these ideas that you might in another place there's this idea that you might consolidate all of the buildings on a block into a kind of point skyscraper and then clear all the space in between. And you know, this is something which very much looks like
This is cool.
like kind of, you know, like Orthodox European modernism, and it's just, you know, slightly with a New York, with New York characteristics. Yes.
The New York characteristics, as far as I can work out, is on the grid.
Yeah.
I for one am thankful for a book which is prepared to include all the cool stuff I want to see at the expense of making the argument a bit dumb. Because like reading about interesting cool stuff is interesting,
Yeah.
regardless of whether you agree with it. Whereas reading something boring and right is not interesting.
No.
Whereas who the hell knows these people?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, one of the things that the book does is to like excavate a lot of very enjoyable future visions from a time that's otherwise rather glossed over. So they get the team together. Like Rockefeller Center, there is a story about it as how it comes together as a project, and you know how they end up developing 3 blocks all at the same time, which is a kind of hitherto unattempted scale. Yeah, there's a sort of story like initially they're trying to find a proper home or a larger home for the Metropolitan Opera. I mean, this all is like complete like Section 106 community infrastructure levy stuff, isn't it? It's like people are still doing these kind of deals now. But yeah, the idea is that you develop like a big site, you make lots of money on lots of bits of it, and you're able to pay for the bit of high culture within the sort of larger financial envelope of that sort of overall development. And it sort of develops, and actually the opera doesn't end up there at all. And also the whole thing gets overtaken by the context of the Great Depression, and there not being very much else to work on for a lot of people.
There's a big complicated story about that, but there's another complicated story about this, and I'm as much of a sucker for this as anyone, as this like assembly of there's this guy, and then there's this guy, and there's this guy, and then they all go and work together in this office, and then they assemble this team, and then there's a drawing of like how the drafting rooms and model rooms are laid out, like how the different people's offices are next to each other, and like and the kind of drawing workflow, and it makes me all rosy-eyed.
Yes.
Yeah, it sounds really cool.
Yeah.
All these different sort of figures. You could kind of make a
all-stars,
little...
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even they're all stars. I haven't heard of a single one of them.
No.
But they're all, you know, but they're all built up. Their stories are all built up in this case.
Yeah.
And how these blocks are going to be Like everything must be perfect. The design must be like utterly virtuoso.
Yeah.
This is like nothing less than a kind of genius level of planning, you know, and then they have this competition, like there's a first scheme and then all the people working on it together are told to produce their own schemes to kind of get things going and then work on a collective one and build up on top of each other. And there's this kind of history of these ideas, which often centers around like how you divide up the masses within the block.
Yeah.
And the battle between the Beaux-Arts instincts, which are bad, versus the kind of pragmatic New York spirit,
Yeah.
which is good.
Yeah.
It should be about maximizing
Congestion.
net to gross
Yeah.
against European moral scruples
Yeah.
and interesting plans.
The sort of cultural superiority of the European model is definitely still implied. You know, they start off trying to make a kind of Beaux-Arts version of it work, which is a version where you have the kind of opera as a freestanding building in the middle of the site. And then
Of course, we were starting off with ideas where there was an opera house and it wasn't essentially commercial development.
Yeah, and then they kind of have a bit around the edge that they can develop, and they can sort of have towers around it and things like that, and they can set up a nice axis where you look down and see the.
And then
opera
someone
in the
has
middle.
a genius plan. What if you replace the opera house with an even bigger commercial
Well,
tower?
even bigger- yeah, yeah. I mean, it does end up with Radio City Theatre in it, doesn't it? Like they do. Yeah, music hall or whatever it is, and yeah, there's a bit of entertainment of a slightly lower sort.
Rem Koolhaas builds this story up to be so big. This story is presented as the culmination of everything, like the history of New York has built up to this shining moment.
Yeah,
And then it's like this glorious, evanescent moment when all these people come together and it's kind of like Rockefeller and this group of all-stars and they're just developing these ideas about how to get more and more rentable floor pad in
yeah.
in a space.
So I mean, we go through these various kind of iterations, lots and lots of. There are ones which look like very Beaux-Arts. There are ones which look much more like kind of Hugh Ferris,
But in a
sort
way,
of
like
ziggurat drawings. What he calls Venice, this idea of like bridges joining buildings together, at times is incredibly sort of prominent in the design, and you have. There was a version with like an enormous building in the middle where then there are kind of peripheral buildings around the side which were being joined together with these enormous kind of quasi mega structural
looks a little half baked.
connections.
Me,
That one, yeah.
Actually, the proposal that the one they built does seem better than a lot of these. I don't think they had poor judgment about what set of massings was most interesting. A kind of settlement of towers.
Yeah.
For me, I would have made it more asymmetric.
So you got
but it's 3 blocks, right? So
Yeah.
you've got 3 places you can put towers in one direction, and then blocks are quite wide, so you can put multiple things in them.
Yeah.
With a kind of corporate plaza in the middle.
And you've got sort of roof gardens and the potential, I think, ultimately like unfulfilled of joining things together with bridges and that sort of thing. Yeah, it's all...
There's a fantastic set of images.
Yeah.
This image was really great.
Where you've got all of these kind of cascading roof gardens going from roof to roof and these
feels
bridges
like-
joining everything together.
Feels like a sort of even better version of like Tokyo, right?
Yeah.
Where you've got this huge slab tower in the middle
Yeah.
with its kind of slightly stepping edge. All around that is a kind of landscape of roof gardens with, palm houses, bridges made of stairs leading, kind of going over the road between the blocks. It's a continuous, quite high, like, is that like,
it's at least like...
good number of stories off the ground. There's this great park of different gardens with water features and palm houses.
Yeah.
And you kind of climb up long stairs to go from one part of this rooftop park to another part, all around the site. The big greenhouse in the Barbican is quite cool.
Yeah.
And that's like 3 stories off the ground.
Yeah.
And it's one greenhouse.
Yeah.
This is like a lot. This is like a whole realm of that. I don't know. Is the Rockefeller Center that great?
I think I've been, and I think it's kind of boring.
You have been?
I think I've been.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's just.
I looked at it quickly on Google Maps, and it looked a bit like Street View. It looked a bit like a corporate plaza, like a kind of cool one.
There's a street with a bunch of luxury shopping on.
Yeah.
And there's the RCA building, which now has Verizon in it, and there's lots of other bits. I think there's lots of offices and people doing economically productive activities such as they do.
Yeah, I mean the number of things that are brought out and described as kind of amazing in this.
Yeah,
there's the description of the development of the massing, and the massing is quite cool. There's the description of the development of this Beaux-Arts kind of underworld.
Yeah,
which you would think would be like Valhalla or something from the way, or like a buried Brussels Palace of Justice.
Yeah,
I don't know what it's like. I've got no idea. I haven't seen any photographs.
I couldn't understand what he was saying from the images that he was showing of it. It didn't.
I'm a bit suspicious when there's like real buildings, and people aren't prepared to put a single photograph of the spaces that they're talking about to justify their argument.
Yeah.
Because if there's something super duper cool in real life, you take a picture of it.
Yeah.
And you can kind of get it really quickly. But if you're not prepared to put a single picture in that's actually about it, it's very easy to ask for a little more evidence.
Yeah. I mean, so there's the sort of like, the revisionism around this project is obviously part of his fantastical myth making about there is some cool stuff in it. There's the Radio City Music Theatre,
but even that is described as like it's like got this idea of no thing could be big enough for this theatre. The only thing that could be big enough is the spectacle of dawn and nature and power as the lights switch on, which I presume is like something where like the lights kind of like come up in the middle. But it's described like cosmic happening where like everyone is wowed.
Oh, there's the good bit about the kind of manager of the music hall at one point wants to put laughing gas into the ventilation system.
Yeah.
Because he thinks it will be good for the audience.
Because it will be like, cool, yeah.
Yeah, it'll be good
and
for
people say, you're going to get sued.
Yeah, you can't do that, actually.
What is at the top? So there's a photograph here, and it's got, like, dancers or something in the back. And then there's these huge hydraulic jacks in the foreground.
Yeah, I think that's all the stage.
What are they jacking up? That's cool.
Don't know.
It's a good image.
It can be big, can't it?
It's a good image of, like... kind of backstage image of something like really mechanical, industrial seeming with theatrical in the background. Yeah, good combination.
I haven't put pictures of it, but there's also like a whole other tangent at this point about the Mexican artist Diego Rivera painted a bunch of murals, and then they were almost immediately. Lots of them were taken down again, and then some of them are still there.
They're great. Like, because he redid it in Mexico City, and I've seen that one. And his murals are very lively, dynamic works of art, and that one is very powerful. It's got that real like propaganda power of like the figure in the middle of this like power, energy, and then like how he thought he would get away with this. I mean, it really is like. It's like industrialists equal evil.
Yeah.
Communists are good.
Yeah. Here's Lenin.
There's like, it's not just here's Lenin. It's like literally like here's a revolution. That's good. Yeah. Here is capitalism. That's like murder and death and evil. Some ways he had some slight complications of his private life, which are not ideal. But
why did they commission him in the first place? Why did they?
Well, because he's a major artist at the time. I mean, it's easy to forget that, like, now he's like Frida Kahlo's husband.
Yes.
But it was definitely not how it was at the time.
At the time, he was quite a major guy.
And you can see why, because they're cool murals. Like, if you wanted someone outside of, like, Italy in the 15th century, I can't think of many more, like, interesting, like, great murals.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I think it expresses a funny attitude.
But he was a
communist.
He was like, dinner with Trotsky.
He was a well-known communist. Yeah. It's a funny bit of commissioning.
They should still have kept it.
It would have been good. Yeah.
I recognise the total impossibility of it. But you don't have to, because he actually did it again.
Yeah.
It's there.
Yeah.
It's not quite the same, but
yeah, so you're not. I mean, I'm not buying it really either. I think it's interesting.
Oh, I don't know.
He does lots. There are lots of interesting things he does in the book, and one of his project to like say that what are commonly regarded as being rather mediocre kind of design by committee projects are actually fantastically radical and interesting.
But the funny thing is Rem Koolhaas belongs absolutely in a tradition of avant-garde architects.
Yeah.
As utterly opposed to these people as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Obviously.
And in his own
He's
context.
far more Le Corbusier than he is Raymond Hood.
Yeah.
In every way.
Yeah.
And we can go over some of them when we talk about these little things at the end. But there is a phenomenon where an outsider can describe or see something in a place.
Yeah.
Can see possibilities in a place that insiders can't necessarily. So you get, it's like you occasionally get extremely politically successful outsiders or outsiders who are able to produce great works of commentary on a city or great works of art about a place because they're able to see the commonplace of that place as not commonplace. Rem Koolhaas described how, like, you know, he was a European and New York is this radiant center of the world.
Yeah.
The place where culture is.
Yeah.
But he actually goes a kind of step further, which is that he is trying to make it conform to his image. He loves the idea of these people because he loves them as people who, on the surface, purely pragmatic because they believe that is the best way to go forward. And underneath have hearts which spring towards beauty and dynamism.
Yeah.
And are in a way savant, unexpressed channelers of a kind of Gaudian beauty, and also like have a direct spiritual connection with the spirit of the city, or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's completely made up.
And
I would posit
he's about to provide also his kind of justification for that kind of making things up, which is going to come in the next part of the book.
But like it's like this hanging on the Babylon image. If we go back into it, it seems cool. Yeah, it seems a bit like, you know, Shinjuku or whatever. But then you look at it, and it does also seem a little bit like the Broadgate Center. Yeah. Look at those parks. Is that a lot of like geometric form and then a whole load of paving? Probably some concessions. And then there's some sort of like planters where they probably change the plants all the time. Yeah. Because they'll die in the wind. Yeah. And there's probably a lot of vents. Yeah. It would be a cool place to visit. I'm not denying that, but it isn't actually the Hanging Gardens of Babylon.
No, it's not quite that, is it? Although they were very good at drawing in those days, and they could.
That's really why the bit that I'm a sucker for is this: like, we're going to assemble all these architects, and then we're going to talk about the drawing rooms. Yeah, we're going to talk about the workflow. Oh, yeah, love it. Yeah, you will notice that Rem Koolhaas does not provide his image making is not in the. This is an image of what it's going to look like.
No, it's much more abstract.
This is like ground. You know, these images are like ground image, axo image. Yeah. Elevation. Rendered plan. Yeah. Nah. Because that's stuff that's useful. for people to tell what it's going to be like.
Yeah. So this is the end of another episode. And soon we'll have the beginning of another one.
Yes. What's that? We've gone over schedule.
We've gone over schedule again, and the episodes are getting too long. We've been talking too much. We can't help ourselves, but there you go. That's just the way it is. There'll be another one along fairly soon. Thank you very much for listening. Our editor is Matthew Lloyd Roberts. Our website is about buildingsandcities.org, where you can find links to all sorts of things that you might be interested in.
Thank you very much to the people supporting the show on Patreon. They're paying for it all. Thank you very much to a couple of kind reviews you've had recently.
Oh, yeah, that's all very much appreciated.
They're very motivating.
Yeah.
You keep coquettishly flipping up images of Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah, there's a picture. There's a famous picture of Donald Trump's desk in Trump Tower with SML XL and Delirious New York on it. Even Trump doesn't have the first edition.
Trump?
Yeah.
You've got loads of money.
Yeah.
Invest in the better copy.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, that was a funny little digression.
You kept flicking it up on the screen.
Yeah.
It's clearly something on your mind.
Well, no, it's on the screen, isn't it? Yeah. Thanks for listening, and consider listening to the next one.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye.